Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Storyteller Studio, episode 16. This week, we're talking about gaming misconceptions. I am your do respite guy, Eric Taylor, but over there to my left, he's your host, Deep Frito. How are you, Deep?
I'm good. It's Monday.
It is.
Start of a productive week. We hope.
I don't have any wood to knock on. My desk is made of carbon fiber, so I can't help you. But anyway, you're the host.
I did it for you. That's true.
Take it away.
Hi, Chantel.
Hey, how you going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah. It's been a week.
It has been a week. You had an eventful Saturday. I'm still confused as to what Sammy was saying most of the time, but
It's okay. Translation, you know what? Maybe I should go through and just subtitle that episode so we know what was being said. Australians, its own language. It has its own, it's its own thing.
which is generally well known is not a misconception because you guys talk funny. But
I don't talk that funny.
to outsiders, it's a little odd. Anyway, hi, Sarah.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing good. It was Monday here too,
Correct.
which means the kids had to do schoolwork. But that's over with now, so yay.
Right. Well, that's good.
I get to
Hopefully,
talk to-
schoolwork will keep them important. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
now I get to talk to grown-ups. So
And we get to talk about games, so that's,
what
Weird.
could be better?
Hi, Matt.
Hey there. All this talk about starting off the week reminds me of my favorite Garfield quote, which is Monday is a terrible way to spend 1/7 of your life. The exception, however, is when you get to talk to grown-ups about cool games. So glad to be here.
Okay. So, I'm not as practiced at Eric on segues and whatnot, so
My segues are bad.
they're better than mine.
You don't even. You just say hi. Like
I say hi.
I fake one. So good.
I tried to think of something, but it didn't work. So today we are talking about gaming misconceptions and stuff along those lines. For some of you, this will potentially make you think back many, many, many years to when you started gaming. For me, it's a couple months. So it's fresh in my mind ish. But, we can have misconceptions about, just tabletop RPGs in general, or misconceptions about a particular campaign or how our story was going. It doesn't necessarily have to be about the genre in and of itself. So, I guess, what are some of I guess from everybody, I'd like to know what's the first thing that you realized that you thought was right that isn't? For me, I thought this was going to be extremely difficult, and having to have dozens of sets of die and rule books and constantly looking at other various things just to figure out what it was that I needed to be doing.
I will.
Yeah.
I will jump on that bandwagon a little bit. I thought there would be a lot more computation to the game than there is. I thought I would be having to add things up and subtract things and run scenarios mathematically, which, you've got to know some modifiers and things like that when you're rolling dice, but it's not as numbers intensive as I thought it would be.
I can agree with that.
Yeah, go ahead, Chantel.
No, you go. I oh no. I thought there would be a lot more death. I feel like I might be in the minority here, but I've really not experienced a lot of character death, other than ones where narratively, oh no, they're gone, and oh yay, they're back again. That was quick in the space of a session. Yeah, that I feel like that's one that I definitely held, and I think I still hold it, but I only really hold it because I know of Sarah's experiences.
Yeah, I was gonna say I thought there'd be a whole lot less character death. Like I had this vision of you make a character and you play that character for a year or two or maybe three in various different campaigns that then come to an end. So you kind of like get this whole story arc that you get to do with your character, and you get to see the whole story, and you get to like develop your character really in depth and really get to know them. And then I found out that either your character dies because you're terrible at strategy and it's your own fault that your character died, or people change jobs and they can't play anymore, or they move, or the group just kind of disintegrates, and then you have to get new people for the group, and the new people don't like the idea of the game that you were playing, so you all as a group decide to play a different campaign, which is still going to be fun. But then that means that character that you thought you were going to delve deeper into and get to know better. And, when people ask you, what are you doing on your Saturday night? Oh, I'm playing this game and I am this class and this race and I have these spells or whatever. And I've acquired this cool loot. No, not a thing. It's never, I mean, for some people, I'm sure that's a thing. It's never been a thing for me. And that's a misconception that I thought it was going to be like that. It's not. It's still fun. Don't get me wrong. It's still fun. It's just not the way I thought it was going to be.
Well, I think we all have a certain amount of attachment to characters that we've created, and it's obviously something we've talked about the last several weeks of creating their backstory and working on these relationships that we create with all of our other people. Someday Father Sam will come back, he says wishfully.
It could happen. You never know. Some of mine have come back. It could.
Yes, bring back Father Sam.
So I'll bring up another one of my misconceptions. I thought that everything, like when I was introduced to playing Savage Worlds and possibly some Dungeons and Dragons, I thought, oh, so this is all going to be medieval fantasy. I don't know if I'm game for that. And there is some, and I've realized that I enjoy that genre more than I anticipated. But I like any genre that you'll see in a movie, you can also run a game for. So I've been surprised and pleased with the variety that can be had in the hobby.
Yeah, that was one thing. That it's good that you bring that up, because my initial thought was, well, it's all going to be some sort of Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter-esque magical creatures and random, races and stuff that we're going to be interacting with. But no, you can last week we were in LA as all humans and impromptu Ghostbusters, and it worked. So good to know. Eric, what are some of your thoughts about? Okay.
No one can hear you. No.
How about now? You can probably hear me now. So what I was saying before I couldn't run tech for my own show is I was born into the tabletop RPGing fold. I was an infant sitting on my dad's lap while he threw dice and GM'd for friends in college. I have always been around it, but I didn't get to start playing until I was older and, never got to play with my dad, those kind of things. because he fell out of the hobby by that point. But I always had the misconception, and still do to an extent, I think, when I really examine how I run things, where if you're not doing the epic thing, you're playing the game wrong. Your story is not as good as someone who is doing the epic thing, right? Like, I get talked to several times about my pacing because I move stories very quickly in the direction of go be epic and save the world. You don't always need to save the world. You can save the town. You can save the fountain. You can save the inn. You can do those things. So I think that's my biggest misconception that's born of years and years of reading fantasy novels and years of watching those kind of movies. Is my misconception is that the that every tale has to be epic, and not every tale does.
I'm curious, Eric, and I think I've been in some of those same storylines where you're like, I need things to be epic, and we just want to. It's funny you say you can save the fountain. I think on one adventure we wanted to save a centaur family's crop of apples, um, and
Yeah.
you got a little frustrated at that. But you have a wealth of experience that might have given you a front row seat to some other people's misconceptions. Have you encountered people where you've seen what they expected was really different than what ended up being delivered in their first couple sessions?
Yes, absolutely. I think that there is a huge misconception when you try to invite people to play that I think is fading out. But for a long time, it was the only people who are playing RPGs are fat white guys who live in their parents' basement, or the girls who can't get a date, right? That's a load of garbage. But I have fought that misconception for my entire career as a GM, trying to convince people to come and play. Similarly, I fought the misconception that you can't possibly be cool, you can't possibly be socially well adjusted, you can't possibly be not a troglodyte and want to play tabletop RPGs. And again, that's a load of garbage. But you also have that misconception of we're going to throw dice every 6 seconds, right? Like, this is a dice rolling board game. For some people it is, but it isn't a requirement of the activity. I have had, I have dealt with the misconceptions with regards to plot armor and character death, where it's like, hey, I'm the protagonist of this story. I can't die, and that's not accurate. You can die. Chances are there's a high chance you will die at some point, especially if you make decisions that move you in that direction. I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I fight now is the idea that because it's a game, we don't take it seriously. And Frito and I have done a lot of World of Warcraft raiding, Destiny 2 raiding, those kind of things in our life. And that's a game, but we've dedicated a big chunk of our time to prepping and being there and going. And we take it seriously. The same is true for tabletop RPGs. I take my prep time very seriously. I take my game time very seriously. And when a game spirals out of control, when a game gets off track, when a set of players or a GM, because I've seen it on both sides, isn't respecting the efforts put in by the other people at their table, the misconception of those people tends to be, well, we're just hanging out and having fun. You don't need to take it so seriously. This is something I've dedicated my 3 hours to, my 4 hours to. I am going to take it seriously. And so I think for a lot of people, there's a misconception that because it's a game, it doesn't matter, that the stakes don't exist.
Just jumping on the back of that as well. I think there's a misconception that because it's a game, we should never feel sad or nothing in it should be upsetting. There's there's sort of there's good upsetting and there's bad upsetting, if that makes sense. Like you can feel heartbroken by something that happens in a game, but still be enjoying that game and enjoying the catharsis of having a controlled sad, if that makes sense. And I think that goes very closely, sort of arm in arm with the idea of taking the game seriously, because you can. You don't have to, but you can, and that's quite important to me, I think. And
Yep.
it's not something that I would have considered when I first started playing.
I would say, at least as an unexpected thing for me, of getting so emotionally invested in not only the character that I was playing, but of my comrades, you know, and even of the story that was going on. You meet, you open up a scene at the very start and you happen across some NPC, and we don't know who he is, we don't know how important he is, and yet you have to interact with that individual to progress the story. It could be some kid pulling on your beard or a couple guys hiding out in a broken down cabin, trying to be safe, but having the investment personally in my character and what they're doing and what that effect could have, have been very surprised at how much, especially in Eternium Gate, all of the stuff that's happening, I not necessarily was expecting, but was surprised that I could have so much influence on the story that was being told. Some of that from my own kind of personal, hey, let's be a herald, even though me don't want to be, because evil lady. But it makes sense for the character. I guess what have been some shocking things or surprising things that not necessarily you as a player, but you as the character have gone through that kind of surprised you, that you weren't necessarily kind of expecting a story or a campaign to kind of go through? I don't know.
I don't know.
Sorry, Windows Update just keeps literally just pinging in my ear over and over again, and I have dismissed it several times. So chat is getting attacked by this really loud ping, and I'm really sorry.
Huh.
I have told it to
Oh.
delay until like 2 a.m. and it just keeps re-pinging me. So
Really important.
Very odd. In terms of, could you rephrase that question, please?
So we have all kind of had personal misconceptions between us as a player and the game, whatever it may be. But I guess, are there misconceptions? Are there a surprising turn of events that your characters have experienced that I guess could be conceived as a misconception that would not necessarily follow some typical trope that might come into play?
I don't know if this is necessarily going to answer the question. You're going to have to just
That's
let
fine.
me know if it's a thing. But I have been surprised by Audrey in Somerset City. I have been surprised by the changes in that character, and I suppose that character has been surprised by the changes that have happened based on the events that have happened in story and the events that have happened in game. And that links to another thing that is a misconception about this game in terms of the social ability. People, like Eric said, people think that it's a load of antisocial white guys playing in a basement. There's a huge amount of social skills involved in playing a TTRPG, and I think bringing it back to Audrey, she wouldn't have had any of those interactions if just life had continued the way that she expected. And I suppose every character, like the start of every campaign, your character's on one trajectory and then stuff happens. And when that capital S stuff happens, they go on a completely different trajectory. And that's kind of, to me, the point, I think.
Yeah, and I guess kind of what I was trying to get to was I created a character and this is who they are. They are this thing, and that is what they're always going to be. And I think that's Somerset is a perfect case of that, because every week or every couple weeks you have the entire cast has a brand new character. And it's not necessarily, they have similarities and they have ties to their previous versions of themselves, but it's not that my character is this immutable thing. And the story that they progress on can have drastic implications of what they end up being several sessions later. So
yeah, I think those moments are really interesting. It's the point that Chantel makes about having to have a lot of social skills to run game effectively and fulfill a quest or whatever the mission might be. It's really relevant. And I realized in one character that I had created, he wasn't very intelligent and he had an annoying quirk. And I thought, okay, I'm building this character that nobody's gonna like, but like from the observer's point of view, it'll be funny. Well, actually, this character ended up being probably one of the most well-liked people in the crew, and it helped me realize that I I might be putting too much stake in my real life on, portraying intelligence or usefulness to people, when just loyalty and being game to do what the group needs is at times more important. So the character that I created and the interactions he had with others helped me to grow and help me gain useful perspective on social relationships. I thought that was really helpful, neat, interesting, etc.
And I've heard of a lot of, not necessarily horror stories, but in various campaigns of, oh no, we're not going to fight this person, we're going to mind control / persuade / intimidate, do some other sort of non-combative thing to get around a particular engagement. And that, I don't know, to me it's odd to have, I've admit, could just be because I haven't played characters that have been, the car salesman that can sell you anything, or been in that kind of scenario where you could just talk your way out of a situation. And I don't know, that's been an interesting thing of combat versus not, and kind of ways to maneuver around it.
Streamlabs updated my Stream Deck, and it doesn't operate my mic anymore, which they have acknowledged is an issue, but I can't fix it just because they acknowledge it. So I keep hitting my hotkey with muscle memory, and I keep having the misconception it's going to work, but it doesn't. Anyway, so I think there is a misconception in general just about games that you're fulfilling some kind of latent violence fantasy a lot, because there are definitely murder hobo games out there. They are a thing. I have played in campaigns where people just want to be murder hobos, and it's the, I kill the merchant because he doesn't give me the price I want. I murder the peasant after he gives me the information. Like, I've played in those games. I don't personally like them, but I know there are people who think the combat system is super cool, and so they want to play murder hobo. And there have definitely been epic combat moments. You can literally find it on our YouTube. You can go watch Sarah one-shot the last boss of our When All Else Fails game on New Year's Eve. But the more interesting thing is villains are more complex than most people think they are. Most GMs worth their salt haven't created a villain who's a caricature of evil, who wakes up in the morning and goes, "No, I want to do evil today," right? There's a reason they're doing evil things. You can look at Somerset City, and there's a reason the Canary is a jerk. You can look at, you can look at what Sazgmoth was doing, and you guys got into why Sazgmoth was doing the things she was doing. Like, there are reasons behind why these characters, because they're characters, they are non-player characters, are doing the things they're doing, and there's a misconception that everything needs to be solved with violence, right? There's this misconception that you stab the problem with a sword and the problem goes away. But if you are facing off against a bandit lieutenant who's parading around causing difficulty in a town, but through course of the campaign have learned that he's just a lieutenant and that the bandits are causing regional issues in kind of this syndicate sort of fashion, and you're just like, nope, we kill the lieutenant. You don't get any information about what's going on with the rest of everything. And just because you killed the lieutenant of Townopolis, it doesn't mean that Citiesburg isn't being threatened by other bandits, right? And your quest is technically undone. So there's definitely that misconception. I think the other biggest misconception I deal with the GM is that the GM is all-knowing, and thus, like, I mean, let's face it, the amount of times you guys come in and do something where I'm like, yep, nope, didn't see that coming a mile away. Sure, allow me to adapt to this on the fly. There are a lot of those moments. And on top of that, the amount of times you're like, hey, I'm going to do this thing, and I'm like, cool, let me think of how that interacts with the actual mechanical rules of the game. Because it isn't something that's in the pre-written text of this is how it functions. And so there's this misconception that your GM, because they are willing to be on that side of the screen, and because they're willing to put themselves out there and tell that story and weave that world and lay it out before your eyes, means that they know everything, and means that they're a rules expert. And I tell everybody who comes in and jumps in Zoom who's never played a Savage Worlds game with me, we're playing Savage Worlds according to Shrimp because we're playing the rules as well as I know them. And there are going to be times where it will be more disruptive for me to look up exactly how a rule works. So your GM's going to get things wrong. Your GM is going to make storytelling decisions that are going to seem odd or going to be frustrating, or you're going to look at them in hindsight and think, this would have been so much a better, cooler, more interesting thing. Chances are you're right, but they didn't think of it in that moment. And they don't know everything. They don't know the end from the beginning, and they certainly don't know what you're going to do each time that you roll dice.
I think that is, for me, a huge misconception that I'm slowly coming to terms with as well, because I think for me I thought that I would feel less nervous about GMing than I do, which is one of the reasons why I haven't. And people keep going, just do it. And I'm like, yeah, but like, that's a lot of responsibility. Which also is its own misconception, because the responsibility for carrying the story can't just be on one person, or else why not just go write a book? And that's its own issue. Like, on both sides of the table, if you're just there to sit and be told a story, you may as well go read a book or watch some TV or like watch a movie or something, instead of deciding that you're going to create a character and engage in a world.
Well, I think that's a big one, right? Is the idea that as I have done do respite and as I have advanced, right, there are a lot of terms out there for what the person behind the screen does, right? You have game master, you have dungeon master, you have dragon master, you have storyteller, you have all of these. I mean, you have Savage Worlds gets nitty gritty about your setting to where if you're playing ETU, you're the dean. If you're playing those kind of things, you're the warden, whatever. The marshal, not the warden, sorry. All of those titles put an immense amount of responsibility on the GM that doesn't actually exist. Because while it is a GM's job to make the final call on this is how we're going to mechanically do something, it's not their job to know the rules inside and out like an encyclopedia. While it is the GM's job to kind of present you with hooks and kind of lay out your multiple pathways for your personal Robert Frost poem, like, you get to decide which of those paths to take, and then it's up to them to narrate it with you. But if you're doing your job correctly as a player, I think that's the misconception, is it's your job to be like, I'm going to roll the dice and my GM will tell me what happens. Well, I need to know why you're rolling the dice. I need to know the action you're taking to roll the dice. I need to know what it is you're doing, because as a GM, that all informs my decision to play the game. I mean, you can even look at, I do it to Sarah a lot when Sarah plays Sadie the Squirrel in Cretania, because Sarah will say to me, I will take aim in Savage Worlds. That means something. That means a mechanic. So if you want to take aim, that's great, but it's an action. You're going to do that. And so there is a misconception, I think, that you don't need to narrate what you're doing as a player because it's the GM's job, but it's not. It is very much your job as a player to narrate your character's actions, because anything you don't narrate, we're going to fill in for you.
And I think that's kind of one of the things that for me as a newer player of, oh, I want to do a thing, and I don't necessarily know how to relay that information in a way that's compelling or that would be interesting to listen to. And I think part of it is a little bit between a in-person game versus an online, because for me, I feel like a lot of times I'm playing for all of you guys that are watching or listening, and I'm less so it's not just this 5 6 people sitting around a table. We have other people that are hopefully invested in what's going on. And I think for me, kind of the initial thing of that relates back to, again, Father Sam, and the end of Wicked Felina, of saying, I want to, like, I had no idea of how to present what I was going to do, aside from the fact of me saying I want to throw my holy water and then shoot it with a shotgun. No idea what would happen, how to present that. And some of that comes from me being a new player and the GM understanding that relationship, and then you being able to relate that back and kind of say, okay, you gave me 2 bits of the story, let me play out how this scene is going to happen, assuming you roll successfully. So
I think there's an interesting kernel in there from my early experience where I thought there was a discrete list of things that I could do, right? Where,
yes,
oh, we're in combat, so I can use my sword or I can use my fist. And the most interesting combat experiences I've seen is where somebody did something really wickedly improvisational because of where we were or who the other person is, or even negotiating through a situation that has been really cool and fun. And so if you can articulate, and Eric, you can tell me your perspective on this. I think I'm pretty in line with your style, but if you can say, I want to throw my holy water in the air and shoot it with my shotgun, the GM should be able to find a way to incorporate some rules to resolve how that ends up, even if it's not super textbook. Hopefully the GM is able to resolve that in a way that makes sense for the story and the rules.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that as long as you can give me, and it's what I say to people at the top of every Savage Worlds game, right, is tell me what you want to do. It doesn't have to be super descriptive. It doesn't have to be incredibly articulate. It doesn't have to be a novel, publishing worthy, anything like that. But just, I mean, when it comes back to that Wicked Felina example, you said, I want to throw my holy water up in the air and shoot it so it coats my pellets. And I'm like, yep, cool, let's do that. Here's how we're going to roll it. And then I'll narrate it from here if you need me to. Right. I think that I always get nervous to criticize Critical Role because it's a dangerous thing to do in our community. But Mercer has done the world a great service and disservice at the same time with how do you want to do this? Because how do you want to do this gives players a great amount of agency to narrate a super cool way to kill a monster. And for those, excuse me, you haven't watched Critical Role, when you're fighting the big bad of an encounter and you get the killing blow, Mercer will say to you, how do you want to do this? And then you get to give the narrative description of how the enemy dies. And it's always something kind of cool and over the top and kind of flamboyant. And that's fine. That's the way it's supposed to be. Not everybody can do that on the fly. And there are GMs who have adopted how do you want to do this and give it to their players under this auspice of, hey, this is your moment to shine. Well, not everybody's comfortable doing that, especially in our case with a streamed game. Similarly, if GMs don't do it, there are players who feel I'm not being given the opportunity to shine and tell my cool story of how I killed my big bad. So the misconception there is if you're not getting to tell the story your way, then the story isn't being told right, I think. And I've seen that happen in several personal examples where I explain a death and somebody's like, hey, you didn't ask me how I wanted to kill the bad guy. And I admit that I kind of bristle and move on because sometimes those descriptions can take a really long time and they don't necessarily add that much in my personal opinion. So I think that the most important thing is knowing what you want to do and then working with your GM to generate the story the two of you want to tell. Another example of that is dramatic tasks with Savage Worlds. We have scaled back on them a lot with my personal groups because not everybody is comfortable narrating what it is they do with their role. And that's kind of part of the dramatic task system. And so I have been personally trying to figure out ways to incorporate the cool mechanic without putting people on the spot to feel that they have to step into a narrator role that they don't want to.
What have been some things that you thought would come into play that haven't in games in general?
I thought that it would be a hinderment for me to not know what an elf can do or not do, or what a centaur can do or not do, or like these different races. I was like, I'm going to be the total noob here and nobody's going to want to play with me because I don't know what these races are or do or what their lore is and things like that. But I've found that if you know ahead of time the game that you're playing and the genre, and if there are races involved that are going to have some element of the storyline, you just read up and you're good. I was needlessly, working that up in my own mind early on.
That reminds me of my very, very first game, actually, because the GM, it was Dark Heresy, and the GM, it was my very first game. Everyone else had been playing, and I'd been watching them play for about 3 months before this GM went, hang on, she's sitting over there and she's watching every game and she seems to be enjoying it. Roll up a character and come play. Okay, first session, he's given me a load of information. And I'm like, oh no, what do I do with this information? Do I tell everyone immediately? Do I say nothing at all? And I think there might be there's a I think there's a misconception, and I don't know, Eric might have to help me out with this one. There's a misconception that in order to bring new people into the game, they need to have a certain amount of information to sort of match with everyone else. But that's what happened to me, and it was overwhelming because I hadn't had, because he just said it verbally aside from everyone else. So I walked into this room and they were like, well, who are you? And I was just like, I'm an assassin. That was it. Because that was the only information I could remember at the time. And so, it was great because it sparked off like this like deep fear of my character for everyone else. But that was the only information I could remember at the time.
That would be a fairly intimidating entrance to meeting new people. I'm an assassin. They don't know if you're here for them or someone else.
I didn't get a chance to say. They all got freaked out and pointed weapons at me, which I then dodged. They shot. They did not go easy on me. They shot at me. I dodged every single one, and they were more afraid.
I think I'm going to have to try that at a dinner party. They're like, so, Matt, what do you do? Assassin. And just see how it plays.
I know your wife. That won't go well. I think that it's a hard point, and it is a misconception of GMs where we're kind of hopped up on our own Kool-Aid when it comes to our story and how awesome our story is. 9 times out of 10, your story is not as cool as you think it is, and it is not as difficult to grok as you think it is. And if it is, you probably have spent too much time making it difficult to grok, and that is actually hurting your story. So we have this misconception that if we bring a new player to our table, we must tell them everything, and we must tell them how super, super cool our world is to make them care. And 9 times out of 10, in my experience, that level of information dump makes someone not want to play. Because it's like, oh,
You've raised the stakes in whatever it is that's being planned, and people get scared.
Yep. Well, and on top of that, there's a misconception of new players that by coming into an established table, you're going to mess things up. You will rock the boat. That's just part of getting someone into a boat that is already floating. The boat will rock. It doesn't mean it's going to tip. It doesn't mean it's going to sink. It doesn't mean you're going to push anybody else out of it. It just means there's going to be a brief moment where we notice you got into it, and then we're going to carry on down the river. And I think that's one of the biggest things for new players is you don't need to know everything. You don't need to necessarily know the rules beyond the basics. And Frito has had this conversation. You don't need to know everything about your own character. You just need to come and sit down and play and be willing to be. The term open-minded is kind of a buzzword at this point. It gets thrown around in every situation under the sun, but it's the best explanation I can think of is you just need to be open-minded to the story that's being told and try to integrate into it, because it's been enough fun that somebody decided to invite you, and it's probably not as complex as you think it is. It's definitely not as complicated as the GM thinks it is, and it's not going to be as hard for you to get involved in as either of you think.
I think one of the things that I've kind of I feel like have had to dial back, but I don't know, is I've felt like coming into this, like, I need to be fully invested and I need to participate in some way in every interaction, every scene, that if my character's there, he needs to put his 2 cents in whenever he can, because I need to be noticed and not just me personally. I just love sitting there listening to people talk and understanding how those interactions happen, and having to kind of separate that out and say, okay, well, I need to have input in what's going on, which isn't necessarily true, because not everyone does do something in every single situation. So yeah.
And that's in and of itself the misconception of, because it's a game, X, Y, and Z is required of me, right?
Yeah.
Where you and I have been friends a long time. You don't have something to say about every situation that takes place. We've had the conversation about sometimes I will say something to you in Discord playing a game, be like, oh, Peter doesn't care about what I just had to say, right?
Yeah.
But that's fine. We've been friends a long time, and I know there's no reason that Belmere or Father Sam or any other character under the sun will have input into any given situation, because they might be preoccupied, they might not care, they might just not have something to say beyond what has already been said. And so there's no need to get involved. And if another player or if your GM feels Belmere would be valuable to this scene, they will pull you in. They will find some way to make you a part of it. Whereas there isn't necessarily a need to insert yourself unless you truly feel your character can add something to that moment.
I had a thought and then it vanished.
This is completely related to something that was said earlier that I kind of dropped. I had a misconception that I would feel more like a nerd. I don't have that. I know I am one. I'm very aware that I know that I am one, but only by dictionary definition. I don't feel like a nerd. And I feel like there's a part of me that's like, oh, I would have liked to be a nerd and feel like there was something nerdy or something about this nerddom, but I don't, it's not there. I just feel like a person who spends time inhabiting the minds of other people in front of other people.
Mhm.
Yeah, I thought that it's funny. I thought that there would be both the good and the bad to go along with, yes, I'm a nerd now, right? Really joining the fray. And I would have, a posse of nerds because, I'm one now. But that also other people would be less inclined to be in my company. But, it's just, you're the same person. You might have a couple new friends who game with you, but yeah, it's not this whole, hey, you're in this exclusive club, which is mutually exclusive to other clubs. I did, however, meet a new coworker, and he was commenting on the mic that I had during Zoom calls. And I was like, oh yeah, I do a web show about tabletop role-playing games. So I play Dungeons and Dragons and other things. And he's like, oh, I never thought I would meet one in person. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, now you have. It's a cool hobby. Try it. So it was kind of funny.
Well, and
Found you in your natural habitat.
Well, and did you say,
Right.
like, I mean, you haven't met me in person.
Yeah,
This is
I
a
was thinking
Zoom
about.
call.
Yeah, I may not exist.
Well, I can shake your hand. We haven't met in person.
I think it's but I think that's that is in and of itself is a misconception, right? Is sure, you have all joined an elite cadre of nerddom. It's not a bad thing. Let's be clear about that. Number one, but number two, There are celebrities all over the world who openly play this game. Or any
Yes.
game, right? I mean, and any of them. You have not only celebrities, but you have people who around the world have been listed on most beautiful people in the world's lists and are most influential people in the world's list who actively play these games. Number one. Number two, just because you have a hobby doesn't mean it's all you do, right? Now, you're looking at a group of people who, yes, I do it for a living now. And Chantel and Sarah are on multiple shows in a week, but that's because they really, really like it. And there's nothing wrong with really, really liking your hobbies. But Matt plays a game every other week. Peter plays in one game a week. There are people out there whose D&D group meets once a month for 5 hours. But just because you're a gamer doesn't any longer mean you're not a basketball player or a weightlifter or a what are other hobbies?
Fashion design.
A filmmaker.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you're not a filmmaker or a fashion designer. It doesn't mean you're not a mom anymore. It doesn't mean any of those things. Your life continues. You just play somebody else's life for 3 hours every week. That's it. It's not an all-consuming thing. It doesn't all of a sudden be like, no, all I do is roll dice now, right? Like, that's a really bad movie trope that doesn't exist in 99.9% of cases. So if you're out there and you have this feeling where you're like, oh man, tabletop RPG sounds so cool. I've watched a couple of episodes of Critical Role. I've done this, I've done that. I've watch something on Do Respite. Good for you. Watch more. Going and playing in a game, messaging Scraticus and getting into a game, messaging us and seeing when the next time we're running one shots and trying to get into a game is a great idea. Go do it. When social distancing and quarantine's not a thing, go to your local game store and weigh your options heavily. But
Dice are expensive. That's all we're saying.
that groups at your local game store can be very hit or miss. But just, it won't consume your life if you don't want it to. And it doesn't have to ever consume your life. It's a misconception that by role-playing someone else for 3 to 4 hours in a week is going to irrevocably change your life in a way that makes you a different person. And 9 times out of 10, the changes that do happen will make you a better person.
Because we all want to be better people.
Yes. I've decided that from now on we are a nerd herd, and that's just what it's gonna be.
We can't use it. It was in Chuck, and CBS will sue us.
Oh, really?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, whatever we call our posse of intellectually inclined people, we're only part-time those things, right? Because we're the rest of the time fashion designers or movie makers or whatever. Eric has criticized me, not really criticized me, given me a little good-natured ribbing over referring to myself as a working stiff or a career guy, right? But you know, I want to build a career and I have the time to, in addition to a tabletop RPG hobby. I think the social skills that I continue to hone while doing tabletop RPG make me a more dynamic social individual, and that can help. So it's only a part-time gig what we do here.
Except
Unless
for
you're
me.
playing 15 to 18 hours a week.
I was like,
Like
except
Sean-
for me,
like
it's
Chantel does.
literally my full-time job.
I mean, it's not even my full-time job, but 15 to 18 hours a week is what I do anyway.
But there's
It still is good. But that's the thing. I don't see that as a bad thing. That isn't a judgment. That's just this is what I like to do, and this is what I enjoy doing. I'm going to keep doing the thing I like doing.
Yep.
And that's ultimately, what it's self-care, it's a hobby. If you enjoy doing a thing, you are going to do more of that thing because you derive value and enjoyment from it. So whether it's, once a month for a couple hours or it's multiple times a day on Chantel's Saturday/Sunday, it's doable.
What would we do if we were talking about golf right now? It's like,
I
oh no,
wouldn't be in
that's
the
going to
golf
take up my
I mean,
life,
like,
right?
A,
Because
wouldn't
that's
be
a more
here.
some of us wouldn't be here, number one.
more
But number two,
time-consuming hobby from
it's
what I
really time
observe.
consuming.
Yes.
Yeah,
But that's why you don't go every weekend.
right. Well, some people do.
But they're the Chantels of the golf world. They have the time and they enjoy doing it.
So our pitch is get into tabletop RPG, less time consuming than golf, or actually maybe it is. Maybe it
I
isn't.
approve. No, we're taking
yeah,
that.
okay.
Yeah,
Say
we'll keep that.
if you're trying to give up a golf habit, try TTRPG. Hey, yeah.
Hit golf,
Sell your
play
clubs.
game.
It's fine. Yeah. that pro sports career isn't going anywhere. Come on Twitch
Yeah.
with us. It'll be fun.
Eric, you love my tangents. You just won't admit it.
I'm just waiting for the angry emails I get from some golf player.
Oh,
Well, I'm sure. You know what? If you get such an email, I'll write a golf TTRPG.
I'm sure. I mean,
Just a one-page golf
wow.
TTRPG.
I mean, Age of
How about
Ignorance
that?
exists, and it's literally a baseball RPG, so they're out there.
Exactly. See, kick
Tools
golf.
of Ignorance. Tools
physical
of
golf.
Ignorance, not Age. All right,
Kick golf, play
Freedom, take us home.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for being here, for listening, for chatting with us. I think for me, the biggest takeaway has been the misconceptions and the thoughts that we have that are barriers to entry are not as daunting as they actually are. And being able to pick up something like a TTRPG is simpler than you think it would be. So, I am Deep Frito. I have been your host this evening. We will be back in a half an hour for, I was going to say Bedlam at Band, because it's been stuck in my head all weekend, but it's not. It's the Curious Case of Paddington Prowler. And you can find two of our members as players, and then obviously Eric is the GM. So we're gonna single Matt out because he's not coming back in a half an hour. So, hi Matt, where can people find you?
Orcish1_83. That's where they'll find me on Twitter. And yeah, I love making new friends. So say hey.
Deal. Sarah, do we have an elaborate costume for this evening?
Yes, I have a mini steampunk hat. I have a shirt that went horribly wrong, but nobody can see that because you only see me from here up. And so, yeah, if you like a mini steampunk hat, come watch.
Sweet. Chantel.
Yes.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Or bye, because I won't see you
Oh.
in a little bit.
Bye.
Constance will be back in a little bit.
Constance will be back in a little bit. I will be constantly Constance.
Correct.
Yes. You can find me at Chantel B. It's there somewhere on the screen, I'm sure. You can also find me in a lot of different places. Check out my website, wordswithcolor.com, and it will tell you all the places that you can find me. Because, quite frankly, I'm in a lot of places all the time. Or just come and ask me on Twitter, and I will give you as much of a response as I can. And you know what? I'll even translate that time to your personal location, if that helps.
That's impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of other people that'll be back in a little bit, hi Eric.
Hi. I will be back in a little bit with Curious Case of Paddington Prowler. It is a creepy, verging on horror, but not quite there steampunk game. I personally think Eternium Gate is creepier. But maybe people disagree with me, but I think that Eternium Gate is creepier than Paddington Prowler. So yeah, you can find me there driving Chantal and Sarah and Katie and Sammy through a Victorian steampunk creepscape. They're in a castle. They met Hattie Marie. These are seminal
Correct.
moments for Durespit.
And I have been your host. You can find me most of the time ignoring my Twitter account at Deep Frito. I will be back on Wednesday for Eternium Gate and new shenanigans that we will be getting into.
It's true.
But
All right. Well, thank you very much for hosting, Frito. Like this new format. My name has been Eric Taylor. Durespit is our thing. You can find us here Monday, Wednesdays, and Saturdays, and then other days sometimes to do other one-shotty type things. But those are when our campaigns / our weekly show is. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. We'll see, hopefully, all of you in half an hour. But until then, I have been Eric, and on behalf of Frito, Chantel, Sarah, and Matt, good night, good luck, stay safe, stay the hell home. We'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.